The courtroom was full. Cameras clicked and microphones caught every sound. People whispered and laughed quietly among themselves. At the center, a black woman was being handcuffed. The metal cuffs clicked sharply, echoing through the room. Some in the audience chuckled. "Another criminal caught," someone whispered. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking serious, but even he seemed to think this was just another ordinary case. The woman did not struggle. She did not beg. She did not even flinch. Her calm face made people uneasy. Her eyes were steady, dark and deep, but they held something no one could understand. Something that made people pause for a moment before looking away. She seemed small in the large courtroom, her shoulders straight, her hands relaxed despite the heavy handcuffs. Everyone expected fear, weakness, maybe regret. But she had none of these. As she was led to her seat, the murmur in the room grew louder. The lawyers whispered to each other, the media scribbled notes frantically, and the public leaned forward to watch closely. No one dared look directly into her eyes. It was as if she held a secret too big to be spoken. The moment she sat down, the laughter stopped suddenly. A quiet tension filled the room. People felt it even if they could not explain it. She glanced at the judge once. Her eyes were calm, almost knowing. Then she looked around the courtroom. Cameras clicked again, but she did not move. There was no fear in her body, only control. People started noticing small things. The way she sat, the way her fingers rested lightly on the bench, the way she seemed completely aware of everything happening around her. She was not just a woman facing a crime, she was something more. A young reporter in the corner leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "Who is she? I've never seen anyone like this." The colleague shrugged. "Probably just a smart criminal. Maybe someone dangerous. But no one acts this calm if they're guilty, right?" But deep down, both of them felt something unusual, something they could not name. The judge called the court to order. "This court will now hear the case of," his voice was firm, but his eyes kept flicking toward the woman. Even he could feel the strange power in her presence. She did not look like a criminal. She looked like someone who had been through battles far beyond this courtroom, someone who had survived storms that no one else could even imagine. The prosecutor stood and adjusted his tie. He smirked slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is an ordinary case. Another lawbreaker, caught and handcuffed." Yet, he paused, almost as if he could feel the energy in the room. Yet, there is something about her that cannot be ignored. The woman listened quietly. Her lips barely moved, but her eyes followed every word. She did not react outwardly, but inside, her mind was sharp, calculating, waiting. She was ready. She had prepared for this moment for years. Years of struggle, training, and sacrifices that no one here could understand. They saw a handcuffed woman, but they did not see the battles she had won. They did not see the people she had saved. They did not see the missions she had completed in secret, missions that had protected countless lives. As the trial began, the audience whispered to each other, trying to figure her out. Some laughed quietly, making jokes about how calm she looked for someone in chains. Others frowned, sensing something deeper. Her calmness was not weakness, it was power. The more people laughed, the more she seemed to grow in their eyes, not in size, but in presence. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. The courtroom officer brought her a glass of water. She took it slowly, without haste, her movements deliberate. Every eye followed her. A small smile formed on her lips, barely noticeable, but enough to make some people uneasy. That smile was not arrogance. It was confidence. It was the kind of confidence that comes only from knowing you have survived more than anyone else in the room could even imagine. Suddenly, the public gallery went silent. She stood up slowly, the handcuffs clinking lightly. Everyone thought she was going to resist or make a scene. But she didn't. She just looked around, scanning the room, seeing every face, every reaction. For the first time, the people realized that the woman they had laughed at might be more than anyone had expected. Something about her presence demanded attention. Something about her told them that she was not ordinary. The judge leaned forward, sensing the change. The murmurs in the room became whispers. Even the prosecutor's confident smirk faltered. He could not read her. No one could. She held secrets that no one here could even guess. And the most shocking part, she knew it. She knew exactly what they thought of her, and she had a plan to change it all. As the first witness was called, the woman sat back down, her eyes still steady. The room had shifted. People stopped laughing. Cameras continued to click, but now, instead of mockery, there was curiosity. Tension hung in the air. Everyone knew, deep inside, that this trial was about to become something far bigger than anyone expected. And in that moment, everyone wondered silently, who is she really? The black woman sat there quietly, handcuffs on her wrists, a calm smile barely touching her lips. She was waiting. The world had laughed at her. But soon, very soon, they would see who she really was. And when that moment came, the courtroom and maybe even the world would never be the same again. The courtroom lights felt cold, but in her mind, she was far away. The black woman sat silently, her hands still in the heavy cuffs, yet her mind wandered back to the paths that brought her here. The people around her saw only a criminal, a mystery in chains. They didn't see the desert she had walked, the city she had left behind, or the fires she had survived. Years ago, her name was whispered in a different place, in a land where survival meant sacrifice every single day. She was a child then, thin and quiet, standing in the middle of a broken street. Buildings were torn apart by war, smoke filled the air, and the sky was red with dust. She remembered holding her little brother's hand, promising him food, promising him safety. But war does not care for promises. That day, the blast came too fast, too close. When she opened her eyes again, he was gone. The courtroom crowd could not imagine this scene. They laughed earlier, thinking she was just another name on the court schedule. But she had walked through nights without food, through streets where soldiers hunted anyone who dared to speak. She learned to run. She learned to hide. She learned to fight. At 15, she joined a small group that called themselves the Silent Hands. They were not criminals, they were protectors. They rescued children, smuggled medicine, and carried messages that could save hundreds of lives. But to the powerful, they were rebels. To those who ruled with iron fists, they were criminals. In the courtroom, she lowered her eyes for a moment, not out of shame, but to hide the fire that burned within them. She remembered the cold nights under broken roofs, the sounds of distant helicopters, the cries of people who had lost everything. Each memory was like a scar, invisible yet heavy. One night stood out the most. It was the night she made her choice. There was a convoy of enemy trucks carrying stolen food meant for starving villages. She knew the risk. If caught, she would be hunted forever. But she went. In the dark, with nothing but her worn shoes and steady breath, she stopped that convoy. She freed the food, led the people out, and vanished before the soldiers could capture her. The villagers called her a ghost, a savior. The government called her a terrorist. Back in the present, the prosecutor spoke loudly about her crimes. His voice echoed across the courtroom walls, painting her as a danger, a threat to order. But those who had been saved by her hands knew a different story. Somewhere out there, mothers still whispered her name when they put their children to sleep. She had learned to survive, but more than that, she had learned to endure. Not for glory. Not for fame. But because someone had to stand when everyone else fell. That was why, years later, when she finally escaped to safer lands, she did not seek comfort. She sought truth. She studied, trained, and built a network in silence, all while the world forgot the villages she had saved. And now, here she was, in a courtroom full of people who had never known hunger, who had never walked through fire. They judged her by papers, by rules, by headlines. But her story was written in blood and ash. The judge's voice pulled her back to the present. "Do you wish to say anything?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. She raised her head slowly. For a second, their eyes met. He saw something he could not name, something too old for her young face, something that made his chest tighten. Not yet, she said calmly. Her voice was soft, but the room went quiet. In the corner, the young reporter who had whispered earlier kept staring. There was something about her presence that refused to fade. Every small movement felt deliberate, every pause felt planned. It was like watching someone who knew exactly how this would end, even if no one else did. Flashbulbs popped again as another photo was taken. Somewhere in that crowd, someone would later look at that picture and realize, this was not the face of a broken woman. This was the face of someone waiting. As the hearing continued, the black woman's past stayed hidden to the world. But inside her heart, the images burned. The brother she had lost. The nights she had starved so others could eat. The lives she had saved without leaving her name. And deep down, she knew one thing, the truth would come out. Not because she begged for it, not because she demanded it, but because truth had a way of finding light, even in the darkest rooms. The courtroom might have laughed when she entered. They might have seen only chains. But soon, they would learn. The handcuffs on her wrists were nothing compared to the weight she had already carried for years. The courtroom felt heavier now. The laughter was gone. The whispers were soft, like wind before a storm. The black woman sat in silence, her hands still bound by cold metal, but her presence was stronger than ever. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashed less now. They were waiting, everyone was waiting for her to speak, for her to break, for something to happen that would explain why this moment felt different from any other trial. The prosecutor cleared his throat loudly and stepped forward. He held a thick folder of papers in his hands. This woman, he began, is accused of spreading unrest, of breaking laws, of interfering where she had no right. She led people astray, she acted above the law. And now, she sits here to answer for her actions. He turned toward her. Do you deny this? The woman raised her eyes slowly. For the first time, she truly looked at him, and the air in the room seemed to shift. Her gaze was steady, cold but calm, like a river in winter. I do not deny my actions, she said. Her voice was soft, but everyone heard it clearly. But you call them crimes. I call them survival. I call them saving lives when no one else would. A ripple went through the room. The judge frowned. Ms. Daniels, this is not the time for speeches, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. She leaned slightly forward, the cuffs clinking as she moved. Then when is the time, Your Honor? You judge me as if you know me, as if these papers tell my story. But what you have are numbers, names, and dates. You do not have truth. The prosecutor laughed lightly, trying to keep control. Truth? You think you can stand here and teach us truth? She looked at him again, and this time, her eyes burned not with anger, but with a strange sadness that made him step back without realizing it. Do you know how many children starved while your government signed papers? Do you know how many families begged for help that never came? The room went silent. Reporters stopped writing. One camera zoomed closer, capturing her face, the slight tremble of her hands, the strength behind her voice. Then she did something no one expected. She asked the guard to bring her a small envelope from her pocket. The guard hesitated, looked at the judge, and the judge nodded. Slowly, the envelope was placed on the table before her. She opened it carefully, her fingers slow and deliberate. Inside were photographs. She held one up. It was an image of a destroyed school, its roof torn apart, smoke rising in the background. Children's bags lay scattered on the ground. This, she said quietly, was my school. I was 12. That day, the sky fell, and the world forgot us. Another photo, a group of starving families in a camp. This is where I learned that food is not a promise. It is a weapon. The prosecutor stepped forward quickly. Your Honor, these are irrelevant. We are here to judge her actions, not her sad stories. The judge raised his hand. Let her continue. His voice was quieter now. She looked around the room. You all laughed when they put these chains on me. You thought I was a thief, a liar, a rebel. But you never asked why. You never asked what I stood against, what I carried on my back when your borders were closed and your eyes looked away. A woman in the public gallery wiped her eyes silently. The young reporter was typing furiously now, his heart pounding. This was no ordinary trial. This was something that would make headlines across the world. The black woman placed the photos back into the envelope and folded her hands again. You call me a criminal. But if saving lives in the dark, if feeding the forgotten, if standing between bullets and children makes me guilty, then yes, I am guilty. The prosecutor opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the desk slowly. He had seen many criminals, many liars, many desperate pleas. But this felt different. There was no begging in her tone. There was no fear. Only truth, cold and heavy, like a stone in the middle of the room. Cameras flashed again, but now the pictures captured something new, a woman in chains, yes, but a woman standing taller than those judging her. For the first time, the courtroom began to doubt. Doubt the case. Doubt the story they were told. Doubt the laughter they had felt just an hour ago. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. In that stillness, a memory returned, her brother's small hand in hers, his voice saying, "Don't be afraid, we'll make it." She opened her eyes again, sharper now. "This trial is not just about me," she said softly. "It is about what the world chooses to see, and what it chooses to ignore." The judge shifted in his seat. The prosecutor looked away. The whispers started again, but this time, they were different, softer, thoughtful, almost guilty. The reveal had begun. It was only the first crack in the wall of lies built around her name, but it was enough. Soon, that wall would break. And when it did, the courtroom would not only know her name, they would know her story. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with noise. News vans lined the streets. Reporters spoke fast into their cameras, their voices mixed with the hum of the city. The trial had started as a simple case, a name in a file, a woman in chains. But now, the story was spreading. The pictures of her calm face, the photos she had shown, the quiet strength in her voice, they were everywhere. Inside, the courtroom was still tense. The judge called for a recess, but no one really left. People stayed in their seats, their eyes fixed on her as if she might disappear if they looked away. The prosecutor spoke quickly into his phone, his face pale. The defense lawyer whispered something to her, but she only nodded slowly. Reporters began to send live updates. Who is this woman really? A criminal or a hero? New photos revealed destroyed villages, government silent. The woman sat with her hands still cuffed. She did not speak, but her presence filled the room like a steady drumbeat. Her story had started to slip through the cracks of silence. It was no longer locked in the dusty corners of forgotten lands. Now, the world was looking. In a nearby office, a government official slammed a folder shut. "This is getting out of control," he said. "The public is turning. The media smells blood." Another official leaned back in his chair. "We should have buried this. She warned us before. We didn't listen." Back in the courtroom, the judge returned. His expression was tight, but his eyes carried something new, doubt, maybe even respect. "Ms. Daniels," he said, "the court has received new documents. They show operations in war zones, aid missions, and your name connected to them." A low murmur spread through the room. Some of the audience who had laughed earlier now kept their eyes down. The same people who had called her a criminal were starting to feel uneasy. She lifted her head. "Yes," she said quietly. "I was there. When your supplies never arrived, when your borders were closed, when your soldiers walked away, I stayed." A reporter raised his hand. "Are you saying you worked for the government?" She shook her head. "No. I worked for the people. Governments forgot them. Someone had to remember." The prosecutor stepped forward, desperate to regain control. "You acted outside the law. You broke rules. You crossed borders without permission." She met his eyes without fear. "Laws are meant to protect people. But what happens when the laws leave them to die? What do you call a law that saves paper but kills children? The question hung in the air like a blade. No one answered. Outside, the story grew. News stations replayed her words. Old photos appeared on screens, grainy images of her leading children through rubble, her carrying medicine on her back, her standing in the ruins of a burned clinic. Some called her a smuggler. Others called her a savior. The court session continued, but the real trial had already moved beyond those walls. Messages flooded social media: free her. Hear her out. Who really failed those people? The prosecutor tried to present more evidence, charts, reports, witnesses who had never even been to the places she had saved. But the energy had shifted. People no longer saw a criminal in chains. They saw a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had done what others were too afraid to do. A child's voice played on one video clip sent to the court. She gave us food. She told us not to be afraid. She told us we mattered. The courtroom was silent as the sound faded. She looked at the judge again. I did not come here to run, she said. I came here because truth cannot live in shadows forever. You can chain my hands, but you cannot chain what I have done. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, one person in the gallery began to clap. It was soft, uncertain. Then another. Then more. The sound grew until the guards had to order silence again, but the echo stayed. That night, the world knew her name. Not just the name in the charge sheet, but the name in the photos, in the stories, in the hearts of those who had survived because of her. The black woman in chains was no longer just a prisoner. She had become a mirror, showing the world what it chose to forget, and forcing it to look back. The fifth day of the trial began with heavy clouds above the courthouse. The city outside was restless. Crowds had grown larger, signs filled the streets, and news cameras pointed at every door. Some people came to protest, others came to support her. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Inside, the courtroom was packed again. The black woman sat with her hands still in the cold metal cuffs. Her face was calm as always, but today her eyes held something sharper, a quiet fire that had not been there before. The judge called the court to order. This session will continue, he said, but his voice carried less authority than it once did. Too many questions had risen. Too much truth had already slipped out. The prosecutor stood quickly. Your Honor, the defense continues to distract with stories and emotional appeals. We have not seen real proof that this woman is what she claims. At that moment, her lawyer rose. We do have proof, he said. And today, you will see it. The black woman slowly reached for a small data drive that had been kept under seal since the start of the trial. The guard placed it on the evidence table. The judge nodded for it to be played. A screen lit up at the front of the courtroom. Grainy footage appeared, night vision images, shaky camera angles, real voices. Soldiers shouting. Smoke. Explosions in the distance. And then, there she was running through the chaos, carrying a wounded boy on her back, bullets flying past her head. Gasps filled the room. Another clip, her standing in front of armed men, hands raised, demanding they release children taken as hostages. They obeyed. Not because they trusted her, but because even they seemed to fear the determination in her voice. The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge raised his hand. Sit down, he said firmly. Clip after clip played, hidden operations, secret missions, moments where she stood alone when everyone else fled. The courtroom could no longer deny it. The woman they had called a criminal was the same woman who had saved hundreds of lives. Reporters typed furiously. News headlines flashed across the world. Who is Ms. Daniels? Hero or threat? Public opinion began to lean harder in her favor. Outside, the crowds cheered when each new video played. Finally, the last clip appeared. It showed her standing in front of a destroyed village, her clothes torn, her face covered in dust, holding a small child in her arms. A voice behind the camera asked, "Why do you keep coming back? Why risk everything?" Her recorded voice answered, "Because no one else will. Because someone has to." The courtroom was silent. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Even the guards shifted uneasily, their hands no longer gripping their weapons so tightly. She turned to face everyone. "You called me a lawbreaker. But tell me, what is a law if it cannot protect the weak? What is justice if it laughs at the hungry?" Her words were not loud, but they cut through the room like a blade. For the first time since the trial began, the prosecutor had no reply. He stared at the floor, his papers trembling in his hands. A woman from the gallery stood up. "She saved my sister," she said, her voice breaking. "Your laws didn't." "She did." The judge banged his gavel for silence, but the sound was weak. The tide had already turned. The black woman straightened her back. "I did not come here to be praised," she said. "I came here to show you the truth. The chains you placed on me do not shame me. They shame the system that let this happen." Her lawyer whispered something, but she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "They need to hear it." The judge cleared his throat. "This court will deliberate. But I must say, this is no longer a simple case." Outside, the crowd roared as the footage spread across every screen. People in faraway countries watched and remembered their own stories of being forgotten. The moment of triumph was not a victory dance. It was not loud. It was the quiet turning of hearts and the cracking of walls that had stood too long. For the first time, she felt the weight of the chains grow lighter, not because they had been removed, but because the truth was finally heavier than the lies. The day of the verdict arrived. The sky above the city was gray, but the streets were alive. Thousands of people gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs, chanting her name. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing the moment from above. Around the world, millions were watching. Inside, the courtroom was silent as the judge returned to his seat. The black woman sat in the same place where it all began, hands cuffed, back straight, eyes steady. But something was different now. The air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear what would be said. The judge cleared his throat. "This court has reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and the documents presented," he said slowly. "What began as a case of alleged crime has revealed something much greater. It has revealed failure not of one woman, but of systems that turned away while lives were lost." He paused, looking at her directly. "Ms. Daniels, this court cannot erase the past. But it also cannot ignore what you have done." The prosecutor sat frozen, his earlier confidence long gone. The defense lawyer folded his hands, holding his breath. "Therefore," the judge continued, "the charges against you are dismissed." Gasps filled the room. Some cried quietly. Others clapped before being told to sit down. Cameras flashed like lightning. The black woman did not stand at first. She simply closed her eyes. The chains still held her wrists, cold and heavy, but now they felt meaningless. Slowly, the guard stepped forward and removed them. The sound of the metal falling away echoed louder than any words. She stood then, her movements calm, graceful, almost too quiet for a room that had just turned upside down. People shouted her name, some in joy, some in anger. But she did not raise her hands in victory. She only looked around the courtroom, her eyes meeting those who had once laughed at her. "I did not come here for applause," she said softly. "I came here because silence is easy, and truth is hard. I chose the hard path." A reporter called out, "What will you do now?" She paused. For a moment, memories filled her mind, her lost brother, the children she had carried to safety, the nights of hunger, the long roads that brought her here. "I will continue," she said simply. "The world does not change because of one trial. It changes because people decide to see what they have ignored." Outside, the crowd erupted when she stepped through the courthouse doors. Some reached out to touch her hand. Others simply stared, as if seeing her for the first time. There were no guards pushing her now. No chains dragging at her wrists. In the weeks that followed, her story spread far beyond the city. Schools taught her name. Aid groups reached out to work with her. Governments that once called her a criminal now invited her to speak. But she refused most offers. This was never about power, she said in one interview. It was about people. The woman returned quietly to the places that had once been forgotten. She rebuilt schools, brought food to villages, and started a network to protect those left in the shadows. She never asked for statues. She never asked for medals. But her presence left a mark. Children who once whispered her name in fear now spoke it with pride. Soldiers who had once chased her now saluted her in respect. Years later, when people spoke of that trial, they did not remember it as a day when a woman was accused. They remembered it as the day when a courtroom full of laughter was forced to listen and a world that had turned its back finally opened its eyes. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, she stood at the edge of a rebuilt schoolyard. Children played where rubble once lay. A little girl ran up to her, holding a small flower. "Is it true you were in jail?" the child asked. The woman smiled gently and knelt down. "For a little while," she said. "But not all chains are bad. Some chains teach you how to break them." The child didn't understand the words fully, but she hugged her anyway. And for the first time in a long time, the woman let herself breathe deeply. Not because her work was done, it would never truly be done, but because the truth had been spoken, and that was enough. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, her story lived on, not in books alone, not in courts or speeches, but in the lives she touched, the voices she awakened, and the silence she refused to keep.